literature. And since I believe we are mostly people from the field of literature and literary theory, so I shall focus on literature and try to spell out what I would call the building blocks of disability literary studies. As all of you know, disability is not a subject that has been canonized yet in our academia. And over the past few years, we have disciplined and popularize it among people. So I shall briefly about personal anecdotes, trying to work out the experience of disability in social and academic spaces. Then I shall try to go on to define what disability is and finally outline the basic tenets of literary disability studies. So I shall begin with a few anecdotes from my personal experience of being a disabled person. I am blind, and my neighbors generally tend to consciously ignore my presence whenever they cross me in the corridors or run into me in the elevator. In fact, they do not even bother to look at me, preferring instead to look through me as if I was not there. The experience of being consciously overlooked by the non-disabled world has become a matter of routine for a disabled person like me. It happens everywhere, whether it is in the metro or whether it is while sitting in the staff room of my very own college. In fact, my experiential knowledge of disability has taught me to understand and theorize the encounter between the non-disabled and disabled world in terms of a dynamics of intentional evasion. What this inevitably leads to is to a politics of disavowal of the disabled on the part of the non-disabled world. For example, when I used to go to a restaurant with my 10-year-old son, the waiter would come up to us, addressing exclusively my 10-year-old son, and ask him what he would like to have. He took down his orders, and then he asked, what about him? To make matters worse, at the end, he would come up with a bill and trust it to my 10-year-old son. This may sound disturbing, but what I find even more unsettling is that this dynamics of intentional evasion or the politics of disavowal of the disabled reproduces itself even within our academic spaces. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that our academia is structured by the dynamics of intentional evasion, and the politics of disavowal of the disabled. Many of us have taught Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. At the end of this novel, the central male protagonist becomes blind and crippled. But how many of us have approached this novel from the perspective of Rochester's disability? Have we ever encouraged our students to engage with that novel from that perspective? This is a novel that is prescribed in undergraduate and postgraduate courses across the country. But even a casual look at the question paper set across our academia as a potent theoretical framework. With this remark, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that I was hardly surprised when the need for introducing disability text and disability perspective into the undergraduate and postgraduate syllabuses of the English course at Delhi University. What is the point, they seem to ask? We have a 3,000-year-old of disability representation.
Sir, your voice is breaking.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me? Hello?
Sir, your voice keeps breaking and we miss out on some of the phrases that you have been using.
I'm present. Can you hear me clearly? Hello?
Yes, Professor. Yes, please continue. We are able
Yes,
to.
sir. Yes,
I'm using the video to ensure that the voice is clear. Is that okay?
G. It's very clear.
Okay. So when I was introducing the perspective into the undergraduate and postgraduate courses of Delhi University, our request was met with puzzled looks that seemed to question the state of our sanity. What is the point? They seem to suggest. In a culture which has over 3,000 years old tradition of disability representation, going back to the Mahabharata and Ramayana, the question of disability representation is still being thought about. We never have conferences on the Ramayana and Mahabharata, or for that matter, any other text in the Indian tradition from the perspective of disability. What is the point indeed? We need to realize that most of us are best temporarily abled bodies. We may become disabled as a result of a freak accident or even due to old age. In fact, the non-disabled people of today are the potentially disabled people of tomorrow. And yet, what is the point? In today's lecture, I would try to address this question. What is the importance of analyzing text from a disability perspective? But before I do that, I think it's important for us to what of my popular imagination, countless images of the human body gone wrong. Images of fragmented and fractured bodies. Images of eyes that cannot see. Images of ears that cannot hear. And images of unstable minds. If we pay attention, all these images are images that evoke a sense of lack. Why is this the case? Have we ever sat back and tried to think about it? Why is disability always related to negative conditions and a sense of deficit? As I start point to this answering this question, let us make a simple statement. It is because of the way that we use disability in our deaf means unable to hear. In fact, in our day-to-day, the term disability is used to refer to a clinically diagnosed condition, which may be physical or mental, but it suggests a deficit that hinders or even incapacitates the individual from performing normative life functions. What we see here is that there is a tendency to medicalize the phenomena of disability and to trace the genesis of the experience of disablement to the human body. But is disability something that has only to do with the human body? Or is there more to it? Let us problematize this medical conception of disability by thinking about a wheelchair user who is confronted with a flight of steps. When confronted with a flight of steps, the wheelchair user is unable to ascend or descend the flight of steps. In a sense, he is disabled. But if the very same wheelchair user is provided with the facility of the ramp or any elevator, he at once ceases to be disabled. If this is the case, then can we say that disability has only to do with the human body? Or does it have something to do with a hostile, disabled, unfriendly social environment that pays little attention to the needs of the disabled person? For this reason, disability scholars have constantly tried to lay emphasis on the fact that while defining disability, we need to go beyond the biological determinants of the phenomena. Disability studies, in fact, tries to examine and understand disability as a social and cultural phenomena. Many of you may be amused that how can disability be a social and cultural phenomena? Let me just confront behavior. We have all seen people compulsively washing their hands
Your voice is breaking time and again.
every 10. Is it still breaking? Just a minute. Let me try to fix this. I hope this works better. Can you people hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Carry on, sir.
Now, please let me know once it breaks again, if it breaks again, right?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So I was talking about obsessive compulsive behavior. We have all seen people who are obsessed with the idea of washing their hands and cleaning up spaces. We have generally looked upon this habit as symptomatic of a psychological disorder. Before COVID, that was very much the case. But after COVID, the same kind of behavior became rational, became desirable, became the norm. So what I'm trying to suggest is that standards of behavior change with the change in context. And if context can change our attitude, behavior, or condition, then can that condition be called natural. It's obviously something that has to do with social and cultural constructions. In order to argue, to refer to H.G. Wells' short story, Country of the Blind. The Country of the Blind is a story of Nunes, a mountaineering enthusiast who goes on expedition on a regular basis. One time when he was on an expedition, he loses his way and lands up in a village which was totally inhabited. On arrival there, he felt that, oh, everything that in the country of the blind,
Your voice is breaking, sir.
my both my eyes, and therefore, I don't know what the problem is.
Professor, if you can use the earphones, I think things would be better. It is
Okay, I'll
very
try
clear
that.
it is very clear. In between, it shortly breaks. So possibly the earphones should help.
And sir, we don't want to lose a word from you. That's why we are very much worried about this voice.
We have very sincere audience here. Yes. So have you thought about the disabled people before this lecture? Have you thought about how our society treats the disabled? Yes, all.
Ma'am, in general context, many a times we thought about that, but not from the literary
Yes,
perspective. So it is very interesting to listen to him. We are
yes,
like looking forward to listen to him. Yeah.
yes. So as I
Okay,
was
let us
talking,
hope
Can I
that
say
this is
something?
it,
yeah,
and we have
This is a totally different angle. Can I say something, please?
yes,
Can I add
sure.
something here?
One at a
No.
time, one at a
yeah,
time.
please.
Yes. One of the things that always troubles me and deeply impacts me is the way we use language regarding disability. One of the things is like we say, it's a lame excuse. So when we are using the word lame, we are actually mentioning a disability. And we are using it very casually without even, I'm blind to that. So we are using words in our everyday
Blind
language
faith.
referring to
Blind faith.
disability. Pardon?
It's telling blind faith,
Use blind
blind
faith
faith.
sometimes.
Yes. Uh, uh, so somewhere we use disability without being cognizant about people around us. It sometimes comes out as very insensitive, and somewhere I think just as we are dealing with gender and we are changing terms, I think there are some things that needs to change when we are using our day-to-day language. Thank you.
I absolutely
Absolutely
agree
so,
with,
absolutely.
I absolutely agree with all of you that we should be very sensitive about the way we use language. I will come to that issue once I get through the initial remarks about what disability really is. And then we will talk about, what should be the right way of addressing these people and the community. So I was talking about The Country of the Blind by H.G. Wells. This is the story of a who loses his way on an expedition and ultimately blind people. on our blind eyes. Therefore, I can very easily become the king of this village. I can dominate this village. But as the story unfolds, we are made to realize that Nune do so. And it would be interesting to try the working schedule was very different.
Sir, sorry to say again, the disturbance is there.
All I said, oh my God.
So we are keen to listen to you, but what to do? There is some technical glitch.
Oh, okay. Let me just see whether if I changing the place in the house works.
Yeah, please, sir.
चलो ना बाहर चलो वहाँ चलो ऊपर चलो. I just hope this works better. Is my voice clearer now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let us just keep our fingers crossed that this works better. I have come to a more open space. So in this village, what happens is that the working schedule is different. All the blind people work during the night. And the reason for that is that they say that the nights are pleasant and the day is warm and hot. So it's easier to work during the night. As they are not dependent on their sight to carry out their work, they have no problems with the darkness. But poor Nunes, he's so dependent on his sight that he cannot work at all during the night because of the absence of light. And therefore, he finds himself completely at bay. The point here is that our social structures are scripted by the needs and convenience of the majority and those in position of power. And those who are not able to conform to that pattern of work are simply marginalized and pushed to the fringes of the social structure. So in the country of the blind, the pattern of work is suited to the needs of blind people. And a sighted person gets marginalized. This is one point that the story makes. That social structures are scripted by the majority, and deviations are necessarily the product of whether you conform or do not conform to that structure. As the story goes on, our dear friend Nunes falls in love with one of the blind young ladies in the village, who happens to be the daughter of the chieftain. He puts forward a proposal for marriage. He feels that everybody would accept it. But to his astonishment, the chieftain refuses it. He says that, look at this man. He keeps on saying such absurd things like the grass is green, the rose is red, the sky is blue. These are all gibberish. They do not make sense. So he's mad. I cannot allow my daughter to get married to a madman. But like in all love stories, the people involved insist. So the chieftain said, okay, let me get Nunes examined by a doctor and see what he says. So Nunes is taken to a doctor. The doctor examines him. And after examining him, he said, okay, now I know why he says such absurd things. In fact, he has these two soft glands, which are called eyes. And these two glands make him talk in this manner. And this is a disease. If we remove these two glands, he will be okay. He will stop talking in that manner. So it is decided that, okay, Nunes will be operated and his eyes would be removed. But the point here is that in the country of the blind, having sight becomes a disease. It becomes the cause of mad behavior. Describing the world in ocular terms is looked upon as a gibberish. So the whole point is we cannot trace things to the human body, but we have to trace things to the way that we structure our socio-cultural environment. For example, if I give you a paper with braille scripts, will you be able to read it? If not, would you be called disabled? Why is it that people who cannot read print are called disabled? To just give another example, if we start gesturing to you in sign language, will you be able to converse with us? So why we call people who cannot converse through spoken words disabled? So the point that I wanted to drive home at this juncture is a simple one. That disability has less to do with the attributes of the human body. And it has more to do with a certain sets of cultural assumptions of how bodies should and can behave. Therefore, Leonard Davis says that the problem is not the persons with disability. The problem is the way that the idea of normalcy has been constructed to create the problem of the disabled person. Therefore, the first fundamental thing that we need to be aware of in disability studies is that disability is a social and cultural experience rather than exclusively a biological one. It is a construct that conforms to power, that conforms to the need of the majority, and we need to create systems that are more accommodative. Before the 1960s, disability was largely seen in medical terms. But from there on, there have been developments which has carried disability into the directions that I have suggested above. People began to think about disability as a kind of social condition. And today we shall try to concentrate. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. Please let me know when I should stop. I hope I'm clear now. Can you people follow me, or is it still breaking?
Yeah, sir. Yeah, sir. Very
Yes,
much.
sir.
Very clear,
Perfectly,
sir.
sir.
Okay. So I have made two statements so far, that disability has less to do with our social, our bodies, and have more to do with certain cultural and social assumptions. And the real problem is the way that the idea of normalcy has been constructed, because it has been constructed in a way that it creates the problem of the disabled person, right? So with these two assumptions, let us move on and try to figure out how do we deal with disability in literature. But before that, I would like to share a experience with you, a personal anecdote once again. I come from a small town in Bihar, Bhagalpur. Once on my way back to Delhi in the train, as I was traveling with a number of my friends, the ticket collector approached me and he asked me for my ticket. I gave him my ticket and I gave him the railway concession. As all of you must be aware, people with blindness are provided with a railway concession. 50% off for the blind person and 50% off for the attendant. So this ticket collector came to me and said, "Arey, you are a charlatan. तुम ठग रहे हो हमको. तुम तो blind नहीं हो. You are not blind." Then everybody around said, "Yes, he is blind." Then the ticket collector said, "I have been listening to him for the past 5 minutes and he is ceaselessly talking in English. How can he be blind if he can talk in English?" The immediate reaction that I had was that on this logic, there would be no blind people in England or Australia or New Zealand or Canada or the US, because everyone there talks in English. But on a more serious note, what this ticket collector was hinting is that in India, English is symptomatic of the status of our education. And blind people, by virtue of not being able to see, it is difficult for the common masses to imagine that they can acquire education. But here I am talking to you in English and teaching English in Delhi University and addressing you in a faculty development program in English. So my basic assertion here is that there are certain preconceptions, prejudices that go into the experience of disablement. And that is based on assumptions that have nothing to do with the ground reality. So if we are talking about trying to accommodate disability and work for the cause of disability, the first and foremost thing we need to do is to work towards changing the mindset of people by bursting these presuppositions, by trying to negotiate the ableist myths about disability, and trying to transform our society. When we talk about disability and literature, the first thing that one talks about, or the most common thing that one talks about, is how disability is used as a metaphor in literature. The use of disability in literature is largely in the form of metaphors, right? For example, Andha Yug. It's a very well-known play. The play is not about blind people, but the word Andha in that play performs a metaphorical function. Blindness in the play is equated with the inability to see the consequences of one's action. What I want to lay emphasis on is the fact that when we use disability as a metaphor, we generally use it in negative terms, as a kind of inability, as a kind of analog for helplessness, inability, lack of understanding, and so on and so forth. But the metaphorical use of disability is problematic, because when we use disability as a metaphor, we are disembedding the expression from the lived life processes of the experience of disablement. We are using it necessarily in a very traditional and conservative sense, and it has nothing to do with the lived life experience of people. So in literature, we should definitely try to connect our representations of disability with lived life experiences, so that it acquires a more robust kind of representation. I think I am running out of time, and therefore I will quickly address the question that you people raised a while ago. How should we use, what kind of phrases should we use to address disabled people? Since you people raised this question, I would quickly address them. Should we call them invalid? Of course not. Should we call them handicapped? Of course not. The very fashionable phrase is these days is differently abled. But tell me, can you name two people in the world who have the same kind of ability? If not,
Definitely no, sir.
yeah, absolutely no. Then why are only a select few called differently abled? All of us are differently abled. And the problem with that phrase that I have is the emphasis is on the word differently, right? So you are bringing in an element of difference. And the whole objective of disability studies and to promote disability is to create an accommodative and egalitarian inclusive society. And if that is our aim, then why should we lay emphasis on differently? So for that reason, I would reject that as well. The other very popular phrase that is used is especially abled. Now you call disabled people especially abled and then ignore them completely. That is the special feature of calling them especially abled. But why do you need to make them appear very different? They may have specific needs, right? Their needs may be different according to the makeup of their bodies. But aren't everyone's need different from another's according to the makeup of their bodies? The makeup of a woman's anatomy and a man's anatomy are different. And the result is that men can use urinals and can pee in a standing position, whereas women cannot. So should we call the need of a WC as a special need? Or is it a specific need according to the body? So think about this. Now you would say that I have rejected everything. So how should we call them? The obvious way, or the right way, politically correct way of addressing this community is persons with disabilities, or what we call PWDs, right? Now you see that in this expression, you are foregrounding the personhood first, right? And disability comes in second. So personhood is more important than the person's disability. So in that sense, the foregrounding of personhood is very important. But political activists believe in asserting their identity as disabled people. And therefore they said that no, for political purposes, we need to foreground our identity as disabled people. So we should call ourselves as disabled people. So these are the two expressions that are politically correct from the perspective of disability studies. Persons with disability, because it foregrounds personhood over the disability, and disabled people because it creates a space for identity assertion and political activism. Now, there was a question that says, should we call them lame? Before that, I want to say that it's more important to disassociate the stigma associated with disability rather than play around with things like what should we call them, right? You may call them whatever you may want to, but if the stigma remains, it will have a negative connotation, right? So the important thing is to call them the right way, no two ways about that. But we need to remove the stigma associated with the experience. And this brings me to the question that the young lady raised, should we call them lame? I don't have any problems in people calling me blind, right? Because I am blind. But the problem is not whether you call me blind or by any other word. The problem is that when you use that word, are you linking it with a particular kind of stigma or not? Right? So you may address a lame person as lame. The problem is not in the word, but in the connotation of stigma that it evokes. For example, many years ago, people said कि ये तो लड़की जैसी हरकतें करती है, and that would have a negative connotation, right? So if the ladies in this meeting are not ashamed of calling themselves women, why should a blind person or a disabled person be ashamed of calling themselves blind or disabled? The need is to remove the stigma. And unfortunately, I guess I have almost run out of time. I would leave the session open for a few questions. If you want to raise them, I would be happy to address them. I'm sorry about the technical glitch in between. There was little I could do about it. Perhaps it's the weather, which is cloudy, that has played a trick on us. But yes, I open the floor for discussion if time permits.
Very invigorating take on disability studies, and we have lot of questions as well as lot of praises in the inbox. Scholars are addressing this is the best session ever, very thoughtful. The level of the talk is really very impressive, and the ideas. So, without wasting much of the time, I would move ahead. Yes, please, one question at a time and be very brief. You can ask your questions to Professor Someshwar. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, Hello, sir. Uh, Sir, I have been a PWS, a person with stutter, since my school days. And I have been also teaching. I mean, I have been in this profession since the last 15 years. So, sir, do you think, I mean, does stuttering also count as a disability in disability studies? And, sir, in popular Hindi films and also in Bangla films, we have seen how they have portrayed a character with a stutter, as somebody to be laughed upon. So, sir, what is your take on this thing? Thank you, sir.
The different forms of representations in popular medium go largely to reinforce ableist beliefs, right? When you laugh at a person who stutters, the obvious thing is that, look, he's not being able to speak the way he should speak. So these are dominant ableist representations that we need to negotiate. And in fact, I had organized a workshop during the summer on representations of disability in Hindi cinema. And this question was very prominent. How people with disability are made objects of laughter. And this is a practice that needs to be, actively resisted. And we need to change the mindset of people. And for that, we need to really invest ourselves in disability studies as a discipline and promote it. And for that purpose, we have created many associations. We have the Indian Disability Studies Collective, an association of people from different parts of India, which is promoting disability studies. Then in my college itself, I have created a center for disability research and training, where we organize awareness campaigns to sensitize the students and society at large with matters pertaining to disability. And what you say is symptomatic of one very important thing, that legislations are important. We cannot do without them. But at the same time, we need to work on people's mindset. And for that, we need to understand how disability is represented in culture and try to resist ableist constructions of disability in culture. And the example that you cited is just one. Thank you.
Any more
Sir.
questions? Some
Yes,
very quick
yes,
questions.
yes, sir. Sir,
y-
can you please mention a few works on this topic? Any other work or yours own?
Work as in creative work or critical work?
Sir, critical work.
For starters, I think you should start with Enforcing Normalcy by Leonard Davis, Extraordinary Bodies by Rosemary Garland Thompson, and articles by Tom Shakespeare. For starters, I think that these are what you should take up. And you could look at Simi Linton's What is Disability Studies and Not Disability Studies. But if you talk in the Indian context, I have come up with an edited volume. In fact, two edited volumes. One with GJV Prasad, which is called Disability in Translation, The Indian Experience. Sorry? A Disability in Translation, The Indian Experience. It's edited by Someshwar Sati and GJV Prasad. It's 2019 from Rutledge. And then a more recent volume, which has a collection of short stories and critical commentaries on them, which is called The Disabled Subject, Retrieving the Disabled Subject, edited by Someshwar Sati, GJV Prasad, and Ritwik Bhattacharya. It's Bloomsbury, 2022. So I think this should be, for beginners, this would be very good. But creative writings, you have enough. Creative writings, you have a lot. And the film that ma'am mentioned at the beginning is also something that we could analyze. But for critical material, I think these 5-6 texts should be a starting point. And you should pick up a kind of reader, the disability studies reader edited by Leonard Davis, right? So pick up a good reader, or you have this handbook of disability studies by Rutledge. So if you want to really initiate yourselves, I think a reader or a handbook would be a good place to start. Thank you.
Any more
May,
questions? Yes.
yes, may I make
Yes.
a observation, Dr.
Yes, yes,
Manjinder?
please.
Yeah,
This is
please.
Neeraj. Professor
Yeah, ma'am.
Someshwar, I must say that your talk is an eye-opener, and so metaphorically, sir, and ironically, it is an eye-opener for those who were not, that enlightened, but the one who is physiologically, who is considered to be, blind or so. So, as we read the social behavior of people towards this disability, I'm reminded of Tennyson and Darwin's theory and his poem In Memoriam, where he says, so careful of the type she seems and so careless of the single life. I think so. We need to have better representations, and life of Stephen Hawking and Helen Keller. It is these lives are a signature on the ability of persons with disability. So if we can give greater representations to this kind of thing, so I think so it would be very good. So
I think you have hit the, yes, please.
Yeah.
I think you have hit the nail on its head, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
Disability is actually the inability to see ability, right?
Yes, yes.
If you are not able to see ability, so who is disabled? The
Yeah.
person who is unable to see their ability, or the person who is thought to be disabled?
Yes. So I think in this world of evolution, so even literary studies, literature also is moving ahead. and there is so much, which is to be taken cognizance of. And there is so much of scope of growth in this area.
Absolutely. And disability is a discipline which is at a very gestative stage in our academia, and
Yeah.
plenty of work can be done, plenty of new work, plenty of work that can make a difference in the academia out there. Whereas
Yes.
if you reiterate the traditional topics, you are just retrashing old material, right?
Yes.
So I would really urge you people to move towards disability studies and analyze disability in culture, whether it is literature, film, or sculpture or painting, because these are unexplored areas. And if you come up with something substantive, you are making a difference, a substantial contribution to the academia going ahead.
Yes. So I think we should go by Milton, who says that illumine what is dark in me.
Or illumine what is dark in society.
Yes,
Absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely.
Paradise Lost.
Yes.
Exactly, exactly.
Let us
So,
regain it then.
Yes.
And I stumbled when I saw King Lear.
Sir, I have a question.
go
Yeah, please.
ahead, go ahead, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. Sir, what I wanted to ask is that don't you feel that this very stigma that you're talking about, it just begins from the family itself and the surrounding when a kid is growing up, the friends also like when person whom within quotes I call normal, they don't know how to actually behave around a person who is disabled. So don't you think that this kind of awareness should begin from the very school level, where kids who are so-called normal should also be, they need to be aware of the difference and to create a more inclusive kind of societal situation.
अगर
This
हिंदी
I,
में
yeah.
हिंदी में
So this,
बोलूं तो आपने मेरे
जी,
दिल की बात कह दी।
जी, जी,
Thank
जी,
you, sir.
परिवर्तन का प्रक्रिया का शुरुआत
जी,
और नींव स्कूल में
जी,
डालना चाहिए,
जी,
right?
बिल्कुल,
Because the
बिल्कुल,
whole
बिल्कुल.
thing is to change the mindset. It's not that
Exactly, sir.
human beings are bad, right?
Exactly. Many a
Exactly.
times it happens that we don't know what we are supposed to do, how to behave, because
Absolutely.
people become awkward somewhere.
That
know,
is, normalizing the disability. Please put your mics off. Please put your mics off. So what thought process I would like to bring in is normalizing the disability. We are all disabled in our own ways. So Professor Someshwar, I would like to see, I would like to hear your personal experiences of, growing up as a scholar, and what are your life experiences on this?
oh my God. I would like, I would need to write an autobiography for that.
Of course, we would love to read it.
See, basically, I think I summed up my experience of growing up as a disabled person when I said that my encounter has been largely structured by a dynamics of intentional evasion. And I feel there has been a politics of disavowal of the
All of
disabled
you,
world.
just a second, Professor. All of you, please put your mics off. There is a lot of disturbance which is coming. Yeah, Professor, we would like to hear to you.
Yes, so there are a number of things that we need to take into account. First is this ableist construction of attitudes towards disability, which has come down from generation to generation. And as one of the participants said, the family plays a very important part. And that way, I feel I have been very fortunate to have been brought up in a family that, tried to negotiate these from the very beginning. For example, the doctor in my early days told me that I should be sent to a special school. My parents resisted that idea. They said, he has to grow up in a society which is not special in that way. So he better learn to grow up in there. That is one. The other thing is that they always laid emphasis that I may be blind, but I'm not different from the other siblings. I should be given the task. I should perform the functions that all other siblings do. So not differentiating between the siblings on this ground in terms of being protective or being soft towards the person. मैं गलती करता था तो मैं भी मार खाता था. Right? So this attitude in the family is very important, and I don't know, because I grew up in a mainstream school, if I may call that. I never really thought about being different. I tried to adapt and adopt the standard modes of pedagogy or going about the world, right? And if we talk about experiences, there are so many of them, but I have been fortunate to have had a very a caring family. By caring, I don't mean protective, but they used to do what was required, and a very caring set of teachers. They never ever gave me extra marks for being blind. If I gave a bad assignment, I also got B's and B minuses, right? So that is very important, that we feel that we should be, in the name of being sensitive, we turn out to be very protective of people.
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic.
That sympathy kills. That sympathy
Kills,
kills. Absolutely.
So there is no end to experiences. So I guess, are we running late? I guess it's 12 o'clock. Your other speaker would be... Yeah.
Good afternoon. Do you find any kind of similarities between this disability literature and resistance and trauma literature?
Disability in literature and resistance in drama literature. Could you please elaborate on that?
Do you find some kind of similarity between this disability literature? Because that is, within quotes, a resistance towards the normal, what people usually think normal. And trauma literature, that it sprouts out of, say, trauma, whether it is from the family or the society or the construct which that short man or the limping man, he is always portrayed as a devilish character. So that actually finally finds a way in the minds of, in the psyche of the people. And like the drama literature means that builds or gets accumulated as a drama and then comes in the form of literature. So is there any kind of similarity between these literatures, or does it intersect anywhere?
Okay. Now, when you refer to disability literature, I think that we should have one thing very clear. As you said, disability literature is a literature of resistance, right? Resistance to what? As you yourself said, to the idea of normalcy, right? So at that level, disability literature is resisting the idea of normalcy. And the stereotypes that circulate in society that are based on this idea of normalcy and ableist mindset. See, the task of disability literature would be to question the idea of normalcy and open up new discursive spaces for alternative modes of thinking about corporeal difference. Right. In that sense, questioning the norm, putting forward alternative modes of thinking vis-a-vis the normal is what disability literature does. And that is what I would say we would call the resistance. So yes, disability literature is very much a kind of literature of resistance, and it would have the attributes of the theater of resistance, right?
Cinema,
Good
cinema
morning,
has
sir.
a,
Good afternoon, sir.
yes, go
Thank you,
ahead.
sir, for such a wonderful lecture. So you are an inspiration for all of us. But I would like to know, sir, are you satisfied with the way you are, and or you make complaints to God, or you are summoned to the will of the God like John Milton? And another thing, sir, I would like to ask from you is that do you see a remarkable change after you conduct the sessions or after you make people aware? And then you see that, yes, it's doing something that people are changing their vision, people are changing their mindsets are getting changed. Sir, please.
The question of satisfaction is very tricky. I don't think human beings should be ever satisfied as a pig, right? So satisfaction is a very problematic issue. But do I have problems with my condition of being blind? I asked this question to one of my colleagues who teach in another college who also happens to be blind. So the answer that she gave is very telling. I may be blind, but think about all the other women who did not have even the minimum economic subsistence to gain education. Am I not better off than them? So that is something that we need to think about, right? And blindness, I don't know. People have this impression that a disability is necessarily an oppressive state of being, which again, I feel it's the construction of a ableist mindset. We have our own joys and sorrows, right? We are like any other individual. हम लोग का भी दिल धड़कता है. We also have emotions.
Yes,
जी,
sir.
जी.
That's
Again,
why
just a second. Again, I would like to add that movie, Margareta with a Straw. That girl who has cerebral palsy, she would like to live like a normal teenager, have her share of fun, have her share of relationships. She would also like to have a drink, though being inflicted with cerebral palsy, her body keeps on shaking. So the title itself is very informative, very symbolic. Margareta with a straw, right? She would also love to have a drink, though with a straw, because her physical condition doesn't allows her. So cinema has a huge role to play. Like we might have seen that movie Hitchki also. The role was played by Rani Mukherjee, normalizing all these physiological problems, right? So I hope I've made my point in this direction. So as sir said कि
absolutely clear.
हम लोगों का भी दिल धड़कता है. So that is very well put across.
So
And
we want to enjoy life as any other person does. And I will quickly just address the last part of her question. Do I see a change? I see a world of change. There is a sea change in the condition of disabled people when I was growing up as a student in the 1980s and early 1990s to today. In the 1990s at JNU, we were just 3 of us, disabled people on the whole campus. Today, you have more than 150 of them at a time, right? So the visibility of disabled people in social spaces has definitely increased. And that has also provided non-disabled people with an opportunity to interact with them and to uh, revise their traditional notions of disability. Society is opening up, but we still have miles to go before we sleep, and miles to go before we sleep. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go
Uh,
ahead, Kanika. Go ahead.
yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Sir,
Good
actually, I have a
afternoon.
question. Sir, I have a student in my class, and he's like, he's blind. And the thing is, when I teach whole class, at the end of the class, he asks me, Ma'am, can you call me, or can you ask some other student to give me special attention so that he can, elaborate on each and every point. Moreover, his grammar is also very weak. And at times I feel that maybe, he hasn't got that kind of education which he should have. Like he was like even my earlier teachers also, they didn't taught me very well. Because of that, I don't have a very good hold on grammar or anything, like on the English language. So what should I do in that case? I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what you have voiced is an it's a very ground reality fact, right? That the educational system that we have do not really cater to the needs of early stage, hold them in good stead at this point of time. Having said that, the important question is, how should we go about it? Uh, I I would suggest that there is a need to not only address that particular in students' needs, unit, right, and create a corpus of volunteers that could give him support and encourage teachers to guide those volunteers or how to go about it. So, in simple terms, we need to set up a service delivery mechanism through the enabling unit. Because आज ये लड़का आया है आपके क्लास में, हो सकता है कल set up an enabling unit in college, and yes, you would need to give him, I don't think we should call it a special attention, but we need to work out remedial classes for them, whether it is done by the teacher or whether your other students would be willing to do it. The way I do it in my college is through student volunteers, because that also gives the students an opportunity to interact.
Thank you so much, sir. I will definitely
The
do this.
Sir, again, my name is Ishaq, and in my college, we have two blind students. They are brothers. And it is perhaps the first time in my college I am seeing these people. But and all the people, including principal and all staff members and the students, they take lot of care of these students from this. If they have any kind of problem, I think that is the first thing
So the first thing that I think you need to those students, ask them what they would like us to help them with. We don't use the word help, we use the word provide them support with. That student outlines the kind of services that they would like us to provide them with. Because at times
How
we
can
assume
we
a lot.
assist?
Sorry? Assess their needs and their demands, right? Because we may assume things that, for example, we may end up pulling his hand like that gentleman. And feel free to contact me. You could get my email and phone number from the organizers. I would be most happy and delighted to be of some use to everybody.
Much gratitude, Professor Someshwar Sati. With your ability towards the disability studies is very outstanding. There some experience of your loss of vision, how you can feel is outstanding. That is a life which is well lived, a life contribution. We are very thankful to you. There was a request coming from scholars that they would like to listen to you endlessly, but we all have time constraints. Much gratitude for coming over. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The pleasure was all mine, and thank you for making my day. I was really touched and impressed by the questions that they were asked. It really shows the level of commitment brought to bear on this session. So thank you so much, and please feel free to contact me at any time. And you can get my email and phone number from the organizers. If you want to call me, I prefer right? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, Professor. Everybody wish to
Thank you.
having organized this very much, required FDP on contemporary trends in English language and literature. Last November, I attended one FDP which was on the similar topic, and I believe as many as you may conduct, as many as institutes, which may conduct, I think we keep on exploring something new all the times. And yes, as already announced, I would be talking about the green studies. Today I'm going to focus on landscapes and visions in the green studies. So this discourse is going to catch on the ecological implications and the human-nature relationship in both the literary texts that exhibit contemporary society's growing eco-consciousness. Already we had a wonderful session, very insightful session about the disability studies, which has raised so many areas of fresh research. And again, as I talk about the green studies today, I'm not going to talk about the redundant things. I'm going to talk about how the landscapes have been imagined, and this imaginary is not something which is totally an imagined area or landscape, but as Camus, Albert Camus, the French theorist, he says that whenever a writer has to say something, he or she is relying both upon the fictional, the imaginary, as well as the real world. So whatever is being fictionalized in the form of, say, climate fiction or some apocalyptic narratives that we have, the base is from reality. So the writers are no doubt extraordinary wordsmiths who recount their experiences to shape responses and lives of people in the real world. These responses are not only to the environmental crisis, but at the same hand, these are evoking some fresh perspectives that provide impetus for efforts which have to be instrumental for a greener and a sustainable earth. The web of words or literary scholarship in the fictional text is not an arid, hyper-intellectual game devoid of actual experience. I remember I met Dr. Gurpreet, the convener, during the Women's Studies conference, international conference at Punjabi University, Patiala, where during our presentation, one of the presenters said that usually people from literature, the students of literature, are criticized for presenting thoughts of fictional words, but these words and the fictional words are effecting changes because they are changing. We just heard the professor was saying that the mindset is something, which does not change in, say, a second or so, not even in a few years. Probably it takes centuries for the mindset to change. So my concern in today's discourse is going to be on the ethical systems as well, besides the ecosystems that I'm going to talk about, with reference to a few works by Amitabh Ghosh. Robinson's New York 2140, Powers the Overstory, and also Ghosh's The Gun Island. The weaving of the real and imaginary about environment in the narratives redirects human consciousness to perceive the threats to nature and cultures. These narratives do get associated with human values and attitude. So the relationship between language and landscape, text and terrain, words and woods is of interdependence that envisions a healthy and varied ecosystem. The interplay between man and landscape, human and non-human, remains committed to the environmentalist praxis which connects humans with the biosphere. Environmental imagination enhances one's understanding about the destruction of natural as well as the human worlds. The eco-critical agenda in literature reveals the truth of ecology to usher in activism for a planetary welfare. The experiential and referential aspects about changing landscapes are the realistic aspects in literature that are heightened by philosophical, political, and scientific interests. So the writings on environment or the environmental issues attempt to bridge the abyss that yawns between language and the object world. So literary representations on ecology are verbalizations of visual representations which open up a dialogue of self-awareness and change in the readers. So we cannot say that literature does nothing, because we know that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the word. We all know that the present century is a century of environment marked by literary inquiry that encompasses the human as well as the non-human. Overexploitation of the natural resources and man's disregard of air, water, and soil sustain him are the ecocentric concerns in the literature today. We all know that the greening of literature dates back to the 70s, but this gained momentum basically in the 90s. The first wave of scholarship in the 90s equates environment with nature and focuses on literary renditions of natural word in poetry, fiction, and non-fiction. The second wave scholarship deals with literature pertaining the metropolis and industrialization. The cross-pollination of literature, environmental studies, along with post-colonial literary studies. There have been studies of ethnic minority, and therefore, literature in the green studies is expanding. It has also expanded in the modern times to environmental justice movements, which addresses the unequal distribution of environmental benefits and the hazards across the population groups, whether a particular caste or class. Now, as I am going to focus on the role of imagination, I just would like to make a mention of what Amitav Ghosh writes in The Great Derangement. Quotes, novelists when they write. Unusual events being necessarily limited in number, it is but natural that these should be excavated over and again in the hope of discovering a yet undiscovered vein. He talks about the unthinkable, he talks about the improbable, and he says that the improbable is not the opposite of probable, but it is an inflection, a gradient, which is a continuum of the probability. And usually, he says, when someone is writing about the improbable or the unthinkable, or is relying upon nature for writing of certain narratives, usually, it is believed that the writer has probably depleted all his imaginative resources. But he says this is not the true picture, because through that imagination, he is trying to effect some kind of a change in perception. And we all know that no changes come from above or here or there from the systems or the governance. The changes that come from within are the changes that shape and remold the planet and also any other systems that are existing in our political eco or the biospheres. So the global environmental crisis, in the words of historian Donald Worcester, is to be determined by the ethical systems and not the ecosystems. The crisis calls for an understanding of those ethical systems that need to be reformed. He asserts that historians, literary scholars, anthropologists, and philosophers cannot do the reforming. And this is, I think I mentioned one thing before also, that people from literature are usually arraigned and accused of, presenting pictures of a fictional word and doing nothing. But what can they do? They can help with the understanding. And it's all about understanding, because that is the preliminary step which has to be taken in order to effect any kind of a reform. Every work of art contextualizes ecology and geology. Ronald Hepburn, the father of environmental aesthetics, suggests that meager and repetitive aesthetic experiences of nature could be enriched by contemplation by discerning expressive qualities in the natural objects. Hepburn and Dewey point out that imagination combines with perception to provide an important resource for an aesthetic experience. This enables one to create fresh perspectives on the world. The perceptual exploration of the landscape and the imaginative powers of an artist create a work of art which enhances understanding. So I'm at the very beginning, I'm clearing that misconception that we usually have, that what has imagination to do with the perception. The perceptual attentiveness intertwined with imagination expands information about a specific place. Imagination usually uses four modes, and I'm using this study by Yang, who writes that these four modes are exploratory, projective, implicative, and revelatory. And all these modes of imagination expand information, aesthetic experience of a place, enrich ecological wisdom. Exploratory imagination enables the receiver to make initial discoveries. These discoveries enrich as well as alter the perception of an object, thing, which lead to an aesthetic judgment. Exploratory mode of imagination struggles to bring together even those details which are beyond sight. It supplies the missing details, such as the unseen images of the landscape beyond the horizon. Projection involves imagining onto, which is an addition to or a replacement of images. This deliberate seeing through the projective mode of imagination gives the new perspectives. This amplifies the perceptions, and it goes beyond the projection to reach a heightened creative power, which penetrates deep into the object to exhibit the most active mode in the aesthetic experience. This involves both visualizing as well as the leaps of imagination that enable one to approach the natural objects from a new viewpoint. So, this kind of an amplification accounts for so much of the non but what the writer is trying to convey through the end structure is becoming more important, and an imaginative exploration of the possibilities constructs an action in the present situation. Moral reasoning and action emerge out of the understanding of the narrative. So, stories explore and evaluate consequences of different possible actions in different scenarios. Narrative entails an empirical perspective construction rooted in a unique history and circumstances, which calls for moral deliberation. Here, I would Saints, Anthropocene, Climate Change, Contagion, Consolation. And I think young research scholars can really contemplate about researching on this poet. He's an internationally acclaimed poet. He writes very nice poem titled Concrete Graves. And this is the context, and this is the reason why we should be expanding more and more about the green studies. Arrogance, avarice, real estate seduction, sly filial deceit, blighted brick buildings, sparring breath wheeze, asthmas, bronchial blocks, death, dust, part protected by masks, Ventolin puffs, more canned sprays, less fresh air to breathe, skeletal skyscrapers, unfinished flyovers, collapse prematurely, burying people, none held responsible, darkly efficient, untimely, a fast track to our planet's detonation. So that's what, this is how, I mean, the imagination, because the places that we are living in is molding our imaginations. And ever since, human beings have been on the planet, there have been two types of people, which are studied by Daniel Quinn in his novel Ismail in 1995, which are the leavers and the takers. The leavers limit themselves out of respect of creatures. They are associated with the primitive cultures, and the takers are the cultures that are destroying the planet's biodiversity for their own benefits. So I think we are all takers, and in one way or other, we are contributing to the devastation or the detonation that Sudeep Sen talks about. We have to ponder upon these things, we have to introspect, and we have to make a meaningful contribution in our own way so that we can contribute to a greener earth. According to Anna Patterson, narratives on environment entail a social view of self. Such narratives establish a group ethos through a vision of shared origin and destiny. These are representations of environmental interpretation which motivate environmentally ethical behavior. The continuous damage to environment that creates an ecological imbalance catches the attention of the literary critics. Green studies engages with the study of relationship between literature and the physical environment. It warns about the environmental threats emanating from governmental, industrial, commercial, and neo-colonial forces. It also discusses the ways to preserve nature. Environmental literature includes nature writing, deep ecology, ecology of the cities, bioregionalism, re-evaluation of a place, discourse on toxicity, and the lives of animals. This environmentally oriented study of literature is, we all know, analyzed by eco characters and the objects, and the internal, that is the text. So whatever talk about justice, or she's talking in the end of raising certain concerns about the environment, about the great project or the Sarovar, the dams that are being built and constructed, and how these are going to harm or they are going to displace the people in the name of development. These people are getting displaced. So I'm just going to not refer to the Hungry Tide and the God of Small Things. Probably you all have heard about that. Let's just talk about some recent fiction, which is Robinson's New York 2140, Powers the Overstory, and Ghosh's Gun Island. In New York 2140, Robinson's characters inhabit the skyscrapers of a flooded New York City, navigating by sky bridges and canals. Though this clematis 50-foot rise in sea level lies beyond the least hopeful predictions, Robinson's sensibility is realist rather than apocalyptic. So long as the apocalypse entails an end to the known world or a rupture in the apparent temporal continuity of history, society and government have not collapsed, nor has the knowledge of civilization been lost. The tedium of everyday life and of everyday politics has not been washed away either. Robinson alludes to ominous sounding events, the first pulse, second pulse, anthropocide, the hydrocatastrophe, and the geo-revolution before demurring, within quotes, we won't go there now. That's pessimistic, boo-hooing, and giving upness, more suitable for the melodrama describing individual fates in the watery decades. Robinson's climate story features a collective protagonist. The novel structure draws attention to its teeming and diverse cast of characters, with each chapter alternating among their viewpoints. Additionally, some sections are told from the standpoint of an anonymous citizen. The citizen alone provides a viewpoint that incorporates a longer arc of the New York's natural and human history, reaching from arrival of Henry Hudson to the successive flooding events that bridge are present with the story's setting. The first time a citizen chimes in it is to discuss the topography of the Bight of New York, providing a perspective where the city is first and foremost an estuary, and Manhattan is the island under all the human crap. Even as the citizen dismisses the antics of the individual humans and derides the reader's interest in heroes and heroines, a plot unfolds thanks to the decision made by the story's characters. Among the most politically engaged are Emilia, podcaster, and Charity, the organizer of Householders Union. They organize a campaign of financial non-compliance against the global oligarchy, responsible for the economic and environmental precarity, refusing to pay rent, mortgages, or debt, or to buy non-essential goods. As we were listening to the earlier speaker about the disability studies, one of you asked whether that is a resistance literature. Same can also be said about the green studies. This is also a resistance literature. And we do see how these characters, they are refusing to pay rents, mortgages, or debt, or to buy any non-essential goods. Eventually, Charity is elected to Congress, where she leverages the strike to nationalize the banks. But the citizens insist that we do not attribute this outcome to Charity herself. So Robinson construes a kind of an agency through these characters. Individuals make history, but it is a collective thing, a wave that people ride in their time, a wave made of individual action. The citizen further challenges the reader to consider that humans, taken as collectives or even as species, do not have to ride a wave of history alone. Robinson argues that the individuals, groups, civilization, and the planet itself all did these things in actor networks of all kinds. And in a particular, he highlights the non-human actors in these networks. Possibly the New York estuary was the prime actor in all that was being told, or maybe it was the bacterial communities. We are already in the times, COVID times, post-COVID times, expressing themselves through their own civilizations, what we might call bodies. So New York 2140 advances a challenging notion of agency in which individual choices are circumscribed by forces beyond the human control, but nonetheless meaningful. The same historical moments that seem to reduce the meaning of these choices give them context and stakes. This outlook is reflected by Robinson writing about COVID-19 pandemic, where he argues that it is an overdue shift to a structure of feeling, which includes the sense of responsibility for enacting history, and the climate crisis ought to have been already precipitated. So I just would now like to switch over to the Overstory, which is an eco-political epic by Powers, again, which is ushering in some kind of alternative perceptions, and which is through the 9 protagonists. And this is what literature does, the alternative modes of thinking and perceptions that it gives to us can really bring in great changes. Powers in the narrative, the Overstory, examines the nesting, biological, spiritual, legal, and political relationships between humans and trees. His activist characters, members of the Life Defense Force, are conservationists rather than climate activists, but climate change looms over the action. Adam, eventually the most radical, broods that the word has been stolen and the atmosphere trashed for the shortest of the short-term gains, while Patricia, a dendrologist, tries to explain the ongoing overhaul of atmosphere by people burning once green things to a disinterested press. Now, Powers' boldest innovations facilitates his exploration of what Adam calls the plant personhood. We were talking about personhood in the previous session also, and here the non-human. Powers has talked about the plant personhood. The book structures signals that trees are among the protagonists of the novel, as vignettes named for human viewpoint characters comprise the first third of the novel, while most of the action takes place at a multi-perspectival characters called trunk, crown, and seeds. Now, this is by the power of naming as well. We were talking about how we have to change our vocabulary. When we introduce trunk, crown, and seeds as protagonists in a novel, look how we can affect the thought processes. Throughout the novel, trees want, plan, and communicate as intricate reciprocal nations of tied together life. The human protagonists are connected by their awareness of the steaming world and their resolve to defend it. Patricia's strategy is to become an ambassador to the reading public, writing make vivid, visible ways that trees support and enrich life. On her view, forests are aware and the environment is a fluid, changing web of purposeful lives. Power concedes that it is a challenging perspective. Patricia's advocacy derails her career, while public and professional mockery nearly drives her to suicide. Though eventually a committed activist, Adam initially joins the LDF, the Life Defense Force, to study what he perceives as the psychological abnormality of its members. His perspective begins to change as he discusses his research with Olivia, an activist who argues that rather than asking what makes some people take the living word seriously, Adam should be studying everyone who thinks that only people matter. Patricia, for her part, argues that the trees stand at the heart of ecology and they must come to stand at the heart of human politics. But what kind of politics would this be? The overstory can only hint at such possibilities as it is set in a world in which the non human life is marginal. The Life Defense Forces engage in a non violent, direct action to defend the old growth forest from clear cutting, but their efforts fail and their desperation leads to tragedy. Olivia is killed in a mission gone awry, and Adam is sentenced for her death. In another sequence, Patricia convinces a judge to block a contested cut, but learns the injunction will drive up the price of timber, incentivizing firms to exploit their current holdings more aggressively. The political narrative of the novel is essentially tragic, showing the impasse at which the existing activists, reformist strategies arrive. So Adam concludes that law is simply human will written down, and therefore law must let every acre of living earth be turned into a tarmac if such is the desire of people. However, the novel suggests other possibilities may be veiled as well. Ray, a law student, learns from the stones should trees have standing that the law's shortfall is that it not only recognizes human victims, that it should instead extend the rights to the non human things as well. So, for Ray, the reading prompts an epiphany about the expansion of personhood as a moral and legal category. I quote from the text: children, women, slaves, aboriginals, the ill, insane, disabled, all changed unthinkably over the centuries into persons by the law. Why? He wonders, shouldn't trees and eagles and rivers and living mountains be next? Unquote. Power indicates that the actualization of such possibilities will depend on the power of imagination. Mimi, a psychologist who abandons the LDF after Olivia's death, reflects that Adam has traded his life for a fable that might light up the minds of the strangers. All through the session since morning, we've been talking about light, and this is how light has to reach and illuminate us, right? The best argument in the world won't change a person's mind, he accepts. The only thing that can do that is a good story. So, in a critical review, Rich in 2018 alleges that such faith in the imagination is misguided. He contends that humans are an innately short term species, and so, question Powers and his readers must confront is not whether we should take action, but how to come to terms with the fact that our species has proved itself incapable of doing so. So via Adam, Powers is reflecting on the the precise ways or the possibilities of predicting and concluding that the planet will endure even if humanity does not. Rich takes this dark optimism to distill not only Adam but Powers' final verdict. Adam's apocalyptic foreboding is only one of the narrative possibilities extended at the end of the novel. Neeley, a programmer whose games chart real and alternative trajectories for civilization, reflects instead that life is going someplace. It wants solutions to problems that nothing alive yet knows how to solve. Mimi suspects that disasters will come, but following them, the earth will become another thing, and people will learn it all over again once the real world ends. So, do we really want to learn once the real world ends? The overstory extends narratives that are apocalyptic in the fatalistic sense and also emancipatory sense. So the stories are adaptations of regeneration and evolution. So the novel concludes, with the seeds of several possible futures that can be planted. Similarly, Gun Island affirms redemptive possibilities of changing a world. Ghosh renders the climate crisis in the continent spanning scale. Venice and the Sundarbans are the waterways. Los Angeles is on fire, and the climax occurs amidst the cataclysmic storm, which seem to belong not on the human experience, but in the pages of some unworldly fantasy. Someone's mic is on. If you could just switch it. So the novel most overtly is a political storyline concerns, which again, is provoking. I will not go into the details because I'm just having a look on the time. Dr. Gurupreet, how much time do I have? Dr. Manjinder?
Go ahead. We are getting enriched with your talk. Please, you can go ahead.
So, all these novels, are exploring some kind of relationship between the human and the non-human beings. It is Robinson's elemental.
Please put your mics off. Please put your mics off, please.
Powers trees or Ghosh's marine mammals. In each, the relationship transcends the awareness or even sympathy to become politically generative. The overstory considers multiple frontiers from which humans can contest the domination of nature, a toolkit that includes civil disobedience, legal argument, engage, science, or any game design. In the Gun Island, the alliance between the blue boat refugees and the dolphins. I just skipped that portion, assuming, sometime, you probably might read or you might have read this, because I just wanted to focus on the insights that we gain. We might read the sequence from Ghosh as well as from Robinson Powers because they're trying to explore what Causes was saying, politics of eco-emancipation, which aims at releasing nature and people from unconstrained exploitative human power, and which proceeds from a new kind of political ecosystem understood as constellation of interconnected human, more than human networks. Ghosh himself calls on the novelists to immerse their readers in a universe animated by non-human voices so that we might rediscover our kinship with other beings. And his novel, like Robinson's in Powers, demonstrates how climate fiction can develop such modes of identification. They respond to the paradox of agency, which John Sputra has identified as a central predicament of the Anthropocene, that even as we must confront the damaging illusion of the human agency existing aloof and apart from non-human nature, we must also consider how to recuperate a nuanced view of human agency that enables humans to engage more fully with the unprecedented crisis. Robinson, Paz, and Ghosh write in the tradition of green critique, which challenges complacency while avoiding the depoliticizing and demobilizing excess of the catastrophe strains. The aspects of their novels, which might be described as apocalyptic, which is like the rising sea level, superstorms, or human displacement, registered the urgency of a climate crisis. But rather than dwelling on such devastation, they attend to the ways in which the climate crisis reconfigures the terrain of fiction and action. In each novel, the magnitude of the crisis and the vast sprawl of these consequences enables improbable alliances that stretch across societies and even across species. Confronting the climate change as isolated individual leaves citizens powerless, but these novels locate their protagonist within the networks that foster reciprocal awareness and enable cooperative action. Their heroes are ordinary people, and even those who are activists or scientists have little in the way of formal power or influence. Most do begin with their novels with the strong political inclinations, but are moved to action as crisis intensifies, joining groups and founding new ones. The Homeowners Union, the LDF, the Life Defense Forces, or the Blue Boat, as in the Gun Island, allow them to overcome their initial passivity. Even organized as such, they cannot save the planet, but they do discover new possibilities, political projects into which their efforts may be invested and out of which practices for sharing vulnerability and responsibility may develop. So if we are sharing some sense that yes, we are all vulnerable, we all must also share a sense of responsibility and agency, Again, they are blowing up myths that some kind of politicians or some kind of committed activists, environmental activists are the only ones, who can affect some kind of a change. You and me, as they have exemplified through these common protagonists and heroes and heroines in the novel, that the common and the ordinary is also vested with the power to effect a change. Whereas apocalyptic narratives are distinguished by radical rupture, the narrative strategies described emphasize the continuity and gradual transformation. And this is the ethical systems, which need to be shaken out of slumber, which the historian Donald Hepster was talking about. I just started my lecture with. This temporal frame of reference reveals surprising dependencies and inheritances, chains of cause and effect that extend beyond lifetimes and across borders. The historical scope of these narratives allow Robinson, Paz, and Ghosh to demonstrate how actions taken at one moment, however incomplete and unsatisfactory, can shape the future. Usually, we supposing if we meet with some kind of a failure or we are not getting the kind of levels of satisfaction that we must have, then what is it that we do is we usually give up. But no, he says, even if the action is incomplete or unsatisfactory, what is it yielding? It is still yielding some kind of changes that have the ability to change and shape the future. So the hope these novels extend, though might be tentative, but I think this kind of authors' convention of apocalyptic imaginary has depicts alternatives to a capitalist modernity that we are surviving and thriving in these days. So we witness instead the fraying of these institutions and the struggles out of which alternatives may eventually emerge. So amidst all this, those who are alert and active may discover the opportunities to mitigate the harms in secure goods, and in doing so, to constitute more just, cooperative, and responsible communities. And I think this is what we have to learn from these narratives, or we have to learn from what Amitav Ghosh wrote in The Great Derangement by writing about the unthinkable and the improbable. Because now, as all these writers, what are they doing? They are reflecting on certain things which were actually not thought of, which were unthinkable, and which were impossible. So we are in these studies, the green studies is greatly marked by a rewriting of our imaginations as well. And with that coming out of that coronavirus, I think again our imagination got rewired, and we are rewriting our imaginations. Climate change is rewriting our imagination as well. At the beginning of the century, advocates could justifiably lament our conspicuous failure to imagine the consequence of climate change. But the climate imagery is now saturated with the apocalyptic scenarios. Today, we must imagine that what can be done, with whom, and on what terms. If we are not to do so passively, then we will have to consign ourselves to our fates and be amongst the vulnerables. Otherwise, even if you find a single dimension or a single thought that can move you ahead, I think the whole thing is achieved and attained. The purpose of reading or writing or airing our thoughts on this or critically discussing this is also achieved. So while climate novels represent a single dimension of the climate imaginary, they are instructive as to how the political imagination can be brought to grapple with climate change, both as a present reality and an array of possible futures. Apocalyptic narratives have been central to climate fiction, and they have indicated that this is a kind of possibility which probably has the potential to even affect the political changes that we are witnessing these days. So much work on the climate imaginary emphasizes the urgency of envisioning a possible and a desirable future. The climate imaginary includes not only the disaster stories, which are stunted, but these are all of relative optimism, and they do point to an alternative future. It's not utopian or otherwise. This kind of a transformation has to be achieved. Again, the thought process, the perception of the individuals, has to be changed if all these changes or a safe and a green future has to be secured to humanity. So Robinson, Powers, and Ghosh are a few among those writers who are challenging us to imagine in new ways of being and acting in an endangered world, modes of attentiveness to human and natural systems in distress, and the measures both ordinary and the extraordinary can take for bringing some kind of an effective change in the total world. I would like to conclude this discourse on green studies again by from reading a poem titled Lenticular from Anthropocene, Climate Change, Contagion and Consolation by Sudeep Sen. Clouds suck themselves invisibly, vacuuming inward, inverted cones, like tornado columns arrested mid-flight in their tracks, orographic, lens-shaped, trying to maintain form and structures algorithm. Dreamscapes melt and mold, flying saucer-like, evanescent, concentric layers, peel, unpeel, swoop up as smoke and slow melting snow. Secrets stored in these barreling swirls and wisps remain a mystery. Chameleon clouds change, color striations with the sun's mood, molecular magic, chromatic DNA, unveiled only for the chosen few. So let's be the chosen few um, who are going to initiate a chain of change to effect a molecular magic in the chromatic DNA of the entire humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Navleen Multani. That was indeed a brilliant presentation, taking in its ambit the literature and green studies or eco-criticism, the theory of Lawrence Buell, Sudeep Sen's poetry, and Amitav Ghosh's fiction and non-fiction. My observation is what touches the most? Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, Sudeep Sen's poetry, or Ghosh's The Great Derangement and the Gun Island as an eco critical text, or literature as green studies activism. Another of my observation is that instead of teaching dry environmental studies, should we not replace it with eco critical text in schools and colleges? And much gratitude for inspiring me to grab a copy of Sudeep Sen's Anthropocene. The book getting the Tagore Prize didn't inspire me much as your talk on it. So I'm going to immediately after this, I'm going to order that book. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much if I really inspired you. But yes, I think this book, this is a book on poetry, and we had Sudeep Sen for the capacity building program on poetry, pedagogy, and profession sometime back in August 2022. And it was lovely, though it was an online session. It was lovely interacting with him. And this book deserves a very, very good read. And I think this could also be, I would suggest, earlier also I suggested that people could research on this as well. Thank you so very much for inviting me, Dr. Gurpreet. I must congratulate you and your department for having put lots of efforts, and I see a good number of participants attending this session who have totally committed themselves. I really appreciate the commendable efforts, ma'am. Thank you so much. Do I have any questions? I'll be happy to hear from you.
I think you didn't hear my question. Maybe there was some glitch in the voice.
No, ma'am. Let me just take that, Dr. Manjinder.
Okay,
I heard that.
okay,
Sorry.
okay. All right. No worries. So the house is open to questions. Rohini, please put your mic off. The house is open to question. I'm also putting my mic off, one person at a time.
I think, Dr. Manjinder, could I take your question? You were asking me, what you asked me about Arundhati Roy's, then Sudeep Sen's, and Amitav Ghosh's, right?
Ghosh.
Yeah.
Right, ma'am.
You know what? I greatly admired the writings of Arundhati Roy, right? But Sudeep Sen is no less than Amitav Ghosh. Nobody can take his place as well. So I value them all, and I learn from all these. But yes, for people who are not much into, say, reading at length, this poetry book, in a very few words, is like an ocean, ocean that is being conveyed to you. So you can always, think of, besides this as well. I thoroughly enjoyed, reading, whether it is fiction or non-fiction, of Arundhati Roy, and the way she has, put up all her environmental concerns vis-a-vis the globalized capitalist context that we are living in the God of Small Things. She has a very nice way of telling us things. Yes, questions, please.
Yeah. Your questions, please. One by one. Mehek Agu is here. She's doing research on Khalid Hosseini text in war-torn Afghanistan as eco-critical text. So, do you have any questions?
Yes, ma'am, I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Ma'am, it was a wonderful topic and session. So, well, we are totally depend upon the modernized objects and this development. It has become part of our lives, right? So, keeping all that in view, should we altogether put curb on this development or modernization? Because that too, in a way, questions our sustainability in these modern times.
Meg, thank you for your question. This again, this question is a very tricky question, because we always want to take the benefits of all the modernity and development, but we must observe the limits and the golden mean, the middle path, which has to be followed. One thing should not come at the expense of the other thing. So if we want to reap the benefits or the fruits of the development, we should not ignore not only the marginalized communities, because when I was talking about Powers and Robinson's work, even the non-human, the trees, the animals, we have to, because we all are aware, in the 5G world now, that those twittering and chirping birds are hardly, visible in many of the areas.
Nidhi, please,
In many places.
excuse, ma'am. Nidhi, please put your mic off. There is disturbance due to this.
So a development which is coming at the cost of a loss of life, whether it is of a non-human, is not the right idea. And therefore, this is what, we have to reason out. We have to, and I think a book by Mark Johnson, Moral Imagination, Implication of Cognitive Science for Ethics, provides a good insight into it in this. Another book by Anna Peterson, Being Human, Ethics, Environment, and Our Place in the World. This is a University of California Press publication, 2001, which could open up new insights about all this. I hope, Mehak, your questions is answered.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Shubdeep, you can ask your questions. You can ask your question. You have put it in the inbox. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, ma'am.
Be little louder. Be little louder.
Yes.
Hello. Yes. So, ma'am, my question to you is, what is the difference between deep ecology and bioregionalism, and how can we relate bioregionalism with memory? Ma'am, you are muted.
Okay. So, are you really working on some in this regard? Are you working on this area?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I am. I am going to research
Okay.
on bioregionalism.
Okay. So, have you already decided some kind of text? Because defining all this in very journal terms is something different, and illustrating it with the help of something which you've already done, or a book text that you have selected, would be more beneficial for your question. Yes, could you let me know what kind of works have you taken up?
Yes, ma'am. I am basically taking Dalit text.
Okay. So your question is bioregionalism and deep ecology, right?
Yes, and how can we relate bioregionalism with memory?
You can relate bioregionalism with memory? Okay. So, I don't know whether you've read The Prisons We Broke or any other, say, The Branded by Lakshman Gaikwad.
Yes, ma'am. I have read The Prison We Broke by Baby Khan.
Okay. So, what they are actually doing is when they are narrating their lives, or the kind of social documentary that is being presented through their biographies or autobiographies, a sense of the region. Now, whatever region and whatever was happening there, if you see, they're trying to explain in that. So, again, when you're
Rohini
talking
is
about,
requested to mute the mic.
if you're talking about the deep ecology, bioregionalism, if I try to explain this with the help of a Venn diagram, deep ecology is the bigger circle, and the bioregionalism is the inner circle, which you're going to focus on, a small part out of the whole big thing.
Yes, ma'am, I get you.
And much like food, our biosphere, our landscape, they are also source of our memory. They are source of our memories when we remember our villages, when we remember the places which we visited, and we are very nostalgic about it. Much like food as a metaphor of nostalgia, so landscape is also a metaphor of nostalgia. I think Shubdeep, you are pointing towards this also.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And I remain so confused with these terms, like they're so similar, I find.
I hope this adds some kind of an understanding to what you were talking about.
Yes, ma'am,
This has to,
absolutely.
yeah. You cannot compartmentalize or demarcate into two separate entities.
Yes.
So, because whatever the deeper concerns, they are going to arise from one specific area.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So, Dr. Multani, you have really inspired the new scholars who are very much, just at the beginning of their research with this deliberations on the green studies. And many of the new researchers also who are in the stage of deciding their topic, they are also inspired by the import of green studies. Do we have any more questions? And today it has been a great day.
Madam, I want simple clarification. Is this bioregionalism opposite to that tourism culture?
Again, I think, sir, this is like we are referring to some offshoots, and again, the bigger deep ecology, and which could be, the relationship cannot be denied.
And tourism is a region also where we have been a tourist. That is also a region, which we remember after we are no longer over there. So, Ishak, I believe they are parts of the same coin. Hello, Ishak?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. I hope you got the answer. See, tourism also, we have been tourists to a place and we are so connected with the landscape of that place that we carry the memories of that place. So that is a region in itself, right? More questions?
Ma'am, I have a request to make to Navleen, ma'am. Could you please send your email ID? It would be helpful.
I surely will. Dr. Gurpreet has my email ID. She can share. Ma'am, is it okay?
Yes, it is perfectly fine. Those who are interested in having the numbers of the resource persons can contact me anytime.
And you can follow ma'am on LinkedIn like I am following. So you can follow ma'am on LinkedIn also. There are a lot of social media platforms, Sudeep Sen is also a friend on social media. So we keep on knowing about the works they are doing. So do follow all your professors on social media also, Shubdeep. And you can have richer interactions over there. Yes. More questions, more questions.
Yeah, my email ID is with ma'am. My contact number is also with ma'am. She can tell you. And then, Dr. Manjinder, I did not update one thing. I'm joining a new university as associate professor, right?
Okay, ma'am. Please share. Where are you going?
Gurpreet has all the details, and I think
But I'll come to know through the social media platform. Wish you the best. And I've heard you in that communication skills FDP also. That was by the Department of Law of Ludhiana, Dr. Harpreet Voras. So I had the pleasure to listen you there too. So participant, thank you so much, ma'am. Any more questions? And I made the right decision to join this FDP despite my bad health, but I've been enriched. Any more questions?
Ma'am,
Good
when
afternoon.
we were very close to, when we were very close to nature and there were no environmental hazards, we call that age as a dark age. And when all the machines were invented, and we called that age enlightenment. So this use of tricky words to satiate our own lust for power and for comforts, this is sometimes creating a lot of problems in understanding the real spirit of the issues.
That's very true. Because we overstep our boundaries, because we don't, I mean, ever, this is what I read from Sudeep Sen's compilation. This is the main reason for the concrete graves, that we are living in these days. So again, I think if we go back to the 19th century and start how reading about, say, industrialization and development, and the transcendental writers, especially Ralph Waldo Emerson